All right, let's talk about yet another theory of personality called the biologic theory. But let me first start off by saying that there are many variations to this theory. Some relate more specifically to the brain, and others, like the evolutionary approach, the evolutionary psychology approach, is more concerned with behavior rather than traits. So, for example, the evolutionary psychology theorizes that males and females have different mating strategies that influence the costs associated with passing on genetic material, such as, or for example, men have lots of sexual partners, but women are more selective due to the costs of pregnancy. Now, this case I just said is probably the most dominant psychological and biological theory to date. Buss is one of the major psychologists associated with it.
The biological basis of personality is the collection of brain systems and mechanisms that underlie human personality. Human neurobiology, especially as it relates to complex traits and behaviors, is not well understood, but research into the neuroanatomical and functional underpinnings of personality are an active field of research. Animal models of behavior, molecular biology, and brain imaging techniques have provided some insight into human personality, especially trait theories. Much of the current understanding of personality from a neurobiological perspective places an emphasis on the biochemistry of the behavioral systems of reward, motivation, and punishment. David Michael Buss is considered one of the founders of evolutionary psychology. The primary topics of his research include male mating strategies, conflict between the sexes, social status, social reputation, prestige, the emotion of jealousy, homicide, anti-homicide defenses, and, most recently, stalking. All of these are approached from an evolutionary perspective. In 1980, Buss and K.H. Craik proposed to introduce prototype theory into personality psychology. In prototyping theory, a group of people are asked to list acts that a person bearing the trait in question would show. Next, a different group of people are asked to name from that list those acts that are most typical for the trait. Then the measurement is conducted by counting the number of times, within a given period of time, a person performs the typical acts.
Now, taking all of this aside, the biologic theory suggests that important components of personality are inherited. So that's the key word. Important components are inherited or determined in part by our gene. And I'm not talking about those things we wear, but I'm talking about the things that are buried deep within our cell's nucleus. And to study biologic and genetic effects on personality, researchers always turn to look at twins, because twin studies are used in many psychological theories to tease out environmental versus genetic characteristics. Now, more specifically, they look at identical twins, and that's because they have the same genetic makeup, so that will eliminate one factor of variation. So they look at identical twins who were raised apart from each other or in different environments.
Some studies suggest that a shared family environment between siblings has less influence on personality than individual experiences of each child. Identical twins have similar personalities, largely because they share the same genetic makeup, rather than their shared environment. In 1951, Hans Eysenck and Donald Prell published an experiment in which identical and fraternal twins, ages 11 and 12, were tested for neuroticism, which includes trait disposition to experience negative effects, including anger, anxiety, self-consciousness, irritability, emotional instability, and depression. The study concluded that the neuroticism trait was a result of up to 80% of genetics, and there was a stronger correlation among identical twins rather than fraternal twins.
Now, results showed that even though the twins were reared separately at an early age, they still had similar personalities. Certain traits that we give credit to the trait theory for categorizing were more influenced by heredity than others were. And one example is the social potency trait. And social potency is the degree to which a person assumes leadership and mastery roles in a social situation. So this was found to be common in both twins that were raised separately. And another trait called traditionalism, which is the tendency to follow authority, was also shown to be common with both twins. But at the same time, there were other traits that had weaker genetic components. And some examples of this is the trait of achievement. It was stronger in one twin versus another, and same with closeness.
Theories of personality that have a biological basis includes Eysenck's three-factor model of personality, which looks at the formation in the brainstem that is involved in mediating arousal and consciousness. Another biological-based theory is Gray's reinforcement sensitivity theory, based on the idea that there are three brain systems that all differently respond to rewarding and punishing stimuli. Whereas Cloninger model of personality is based on the idea that different responses to punishing, rewarding, and novel stimuli, the main characteristics of the human mind is caused by an interaction of the three dimensions. In contrast, the five-factor model is a widely used personality assessment that describes 5 core traits that a person possesses based on the structure and function of the brain.
So some researchers have even gone further to look at specific genes to try and relate to our personality. One example is that people with a longer dopamine 4 receptor gene are more likely to be thrill seekers. So basically, if you have this gene, you may love roller coasters and probably want to skydive one day. Hey, that sounds a lot like me. No, but don't think that just because you have a gene, you're destined to have that personality. We all know that. So just because you have a longer dopamine 4 receptor gene doesn't mean you will be a thrill seeker for sure. There are a lot of other things, such as environmental factors, that are coupled with genes that account for variation. Like looking back at this case of the identical twin. Obviously, there were parts of their personality that we can attribute to how they were reared and differences in their environment growing up.
Like all living things, people have inherited innate qualities. There are also events or experiences which happen during life. Nature describes the effect of a person's genes and biology, whereas nurture describes whatever happens during life. Heritability estimates typically individual differences range from 40% to 60%, and only 20% are due to environment. It has been shown that personality traits are more malleable by environmental influences than researchers originally believed. Personality differences predict the occurrence of life experiences. Judith Rich Harris's group socialization theory postulates that an individual's peer groups, rather than parental figures, are the primary influence of personality and behavior in adulthood. This theory points at the peer group representing the environmental influence on a child's personality, rather than the parental style or home environment.
Another key word to know with this theory and many other theories is the word temperament. Now, temperament is an innate disposition, and that's why I bring it up with the biologic theory, because of that word innate. Innate usually means brought up by genetics or it's inherited. So temperament is anything from our mood to our activity level, and it's usually consistent throughout our life. And temperament is not solely just associated with the biologic theory. It's also associated with several other theories, including the trait theory.
In psychology, temperament broadly refers to consistent individual differences in behavior that are biologically based and are relatively independent of learning, system of values and attitudes. Some researchers point to association of temperament with formal dynamical features of behavior, such as energetic aspects, plasticity, sensitivity to specific reinforcers and emotionality. Longitudinal research in the 1920s began to establish temperament as something which is stable across the lifespan and one factor underlying our personality. Temperament is determined through specific behavioral profiles, usually focusing on those that are both easily measurable and testable early in childhood.
So biologic principles can underlie important concepts in many personality theories. So overall, the important takeaway is that our inherited genes, to some degree, lead to our traits, which then in turn lead to our behavior or our personality. But this isn't an end-all, be-all relationship. Our genes don't always determine our total personality. There has to be other things that account for this, and that includes environmental factors.